Please don't come. My wife doesn't want you and Mom to be here. That message showed up on my phone screen on the very morning my son was getting married. Not because the trip was too far, not because his mother's health was weak, but because our presence was seen as something embarrassing. I stood still in the living room, my tie not even finished yet, and wondered, when did I raise a successful son and fail at teaching him to remember where he came from? Before I go on, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Your presence here helps stories like this be told all the way through. And now, let me tell you what happened after that message. That morning, I still went through my usual routine, as if nothing was about to fall apart. I stood in front of the mirror and carefully tied my dark blue tie. The one Tyler once said made me look more respectable than my real age. I can't remember the last time my son complimented me, but I kept that tie anyway. That's what fathers do. We remember the small things longer than the important ones. Elizabeth was still in the bedroom. She came out slowly, one hand resting on the doorframe to steady herself. The cream-colored dress she bought last week still had its folds. It was the first dress she had chosen since leaving the hospital. I saw real excitement in her eyes. Not for the reception, but for the thought of sitting in the parents' row, watching her son walk down the aisle. I thought it was just another quiet morning of late-found happiness. Then the phone vibrated, just once. Not urgent, no alarm, but enough to make the room feel heavier than before. I looked down. Tyler's name. Not a call, just a short message. Dad, please don't come. I read it again, slowly, the way I used to read complex engineering drawings back when I worked. I waited for another line to appear. Nothing. I opened the message fully. Read every word. Dad, please don't come. Tiffany and her family are uncomfortable if you and Mom show up. I already told everyone you're traveling. Please don't put me in an awkward position. I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't misreading it. I was used to tolerances off by a fraction of an inch. Used to systems failing if a single bolt was misplaced. But I was not used to a child deliberately erasing his parents from his life, especially on his wedding day. Elizabeth looked at me. She didn't ask. She just looked, as if she could feel that something had shifted. I folded the phone and placed it on the table. For a few seconds I thought about smiling and lying. But after more than 40 years together, she always knows when my silence means something can't be softened. Why? She asked. Her voice was quiet but steady. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the wooden cabinet where we keep our important documents. Inside, along with the familiar folders, was a thick envelope. One I had prepared weeks earlier. Our wedding gift. Not cash, not jewelry. The deed to the beachfront villa, the house I had spent my entire life working to hold on to, with the thought that one day I would hand it to my son, along with one reminder, keep it, and don't forget where it came from. I placed the envelope on the table unopened. Only then did I tell Elizabeth what the message said. She didn't cry. Not at first. She sat down, slowly gripping the edge of her dress. I watched her breathing slow, the way it did when she was learning to breathe again after the long treatments. She said softly, "Maybe he's just stressed." I nodded. I wanted to believe that, but something else was bothering me more than the message. I picked up my tablet, logged into our joint bank account, the one I had let Tyler manage for the past 2 years because it was easier for family matters. I'm not a suspicious man. I believe in clean systems. I believe that when things are placed where they belong, they run smoothly. The transaction list appeared. I scrolled down, then further. Numbers I didn't recognize. Repeated payments. The name of a high-end event planning company. Large amounts. Not once, not twice. I stopped when I saw the total. $250,000. I didn't get angry. Not right away. I sat there, checked the dates. Every payment had been made within the last 3 months. The same months Tyler kept calling me, saying the wedding would be simple and intimate. I turned off the screen. The room was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. Elizabeth looked at me again, this time with real concern. "Is there something else?" she asked. I placed my hand on the wedding gift envelope, then pulled it back. The question in my mind was no longer why my son was ashamed of his parents. It was something colder, more unsettling. When did my trust become the funding for my own silence? That morning I understood something. That message wasn't the beginning. It was only the first visible sign that a door had been closed a long time ago, and I was the last one to notice. After Elizabeth went to lie down, I stayed behind, alone in the living room. The wedding envelope sat on the table unopened, like a question that hadn't been given permission to exist yet. I wasn't angry. I just felt something familiar. The feeling of a man who spent his life working with metal and blueprints. When a system shows signs of drifting out of alignment, the first step is never panic. It's inspection. One connection at a time. I opened the tablet again, not to look for more numbers that would weigh on my chest, but to understand exactly where I was standing. I wrote everything down. Every payment, every date, every recipient. On paper, it was all clean. The digital signature was mine. The authority had been given by me. Tyler hadn't stolen anything. He had only used what I placed in his hands, with the belief that family was a concept that didn't need fine print. I stood up and made a cup of tea, not coffee. I needed a clear head, not a faster heartbeat. As the water boiled, I looked out the window. Seattle in the morning has a particular kind of quiet, the kind that makes you believe everything is working just fine. I picked up my phone and called William. William never asks many questions. He never has. We've known each other since we were young, back when I didn't think I'd grow old, and he didn't think he'd spend his life using the law to protect people who trusted the wrong places. I only said one thing. I need you to look at some documents. Right now, we connected on a video call. I shared my screen and opened the files I had let Tyler handle on my behalf. William stayed silent longer than usual. He didn't interrupt. He didn't act surprised. When I finished, he said just one sentence. "Matthew, there are a few things you should know." I listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't rush a reaction. He pointed out a mortgage agreement I had signed nearly a year earlier. Electronically. On a day I was traveling for work. The vacation house Elizabeth loved so much. The place we went whenever she needed sea air had been used as collateral for an investment. The beneficiary wasn't Tyler. It was Mr. Sterling's company, Tiffany's father. I asked. "Is the contract still valid?" William said. "Yes, but it's in your name, and you still have the right to stop everything if you act soon enough." I didn't feel betrayed in the dramatic sense of the word. What I felt was more precise, like watching a straight line bend slowly over time, and realizing I hadn't looked closely enough to notice. Tyler hadn't asked. He had simply stayed quiet, and I had mistaken that silence for maturity. William didn't tell me what to do. He only asked one question. "What do you want to protect?" I looked toward the bedroom where Elizabeth was resting. I answered without hesitation. "I want to protect my wife's peace, and after that, I want my decision-making power back." The call ended. I didn't get up right away. I sat there, looking at the wedding envelope again. This time, I opened it, not to review the documents. I knew them too well, but to ask myself what I had been preparing to hand over to people who had just asked me to disappear. I called the bank. My voice was calm. I requested an immediate freeze on all premium credit cards under my name that Tyler was using. I confirmed the cancellation of all pending payments to the event planning company. No explanations were needed. They didn't ask. It was my right, and for the first time in years, I used it. Then I called the property management firm. The beachfront villa, the gift that would no longer be given, was returned to full ownership status under my name. No arguments, no emotion. Everything happened quietly. No shouting, no accusations. Just short calls, clear confirmations. And I realized something then. Control doesn't need noise to be effective. Elizabeth woke up just as I finished the last call. She came out and looked at me, waiting for an explanation. I told her only what needed to be said. No more, no less. She listened, then sat beside me. "Are we going?" she asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the message from that morning, about being asked to vanish for someone else's comfort. Then I thought of something simpler. If I didn't show up today, I might never truly show up in my son's life again. "Yes," I said, "but not the way they expect." We got ready to leave. No rush, no tension. Elizabeth changed her shoes, careful as always. I took the envelope with me, not to give it away, but to remind myself that some things, when handed to the wrong people, don't become gifts. They become excuses to erase you. On the drive, I didn't turn on any music. I let the silence stay. I wasn't planning revenge. I was forming something colder, clearer. If the truth had to come out today, then it would come out under the very lights they had set up to show off. And I knew one thing for certain. When the doors to that ceremony opened, there would be no turning back. For any of us. We arrived while the ceremony still hadn't begun. The estate sat on a quiet hillside, surrounded by hedges trimmed more carefully than necessary. The kind of precision meant to remind everyone that the owner didn't appreciate randomness. I parked in the staff area, not because there was no space, but because I didn't want attention any earlier than needed. Elizabeth held my hand as we stepped out. Her breathing was slow, steady. I knew she was calming herself. So was I. Neither of us mentioned the message from that morning. Everything that needed to be said had already been left behind our front door. Inside, the lighting was even, bright but cold. Soft music played in the background, just loud enough to fill the gaps between polite greetings. I looked around and noticed how few familiar faces there were. Tyler's old friends, the ones who used to have dinner at our house, were almost all gone. Instead, there were quick handshakes, carefully measured smiles, eyes that assessed someone's value before deciding how long to stand beside them. I didn't look for Tyler right away. I stayed close to Elizabeth and guided her to a chair near the aisle. She wasn't tired. I just wanted her to have support. I watched the room like someone who didn't belong here. And maybe, the way my son wanted it, I truly didn't. Tiffany appeared across the room. Her wedding dress caught the light shimmering. She stood in the middle of a group, laughing easily. I overheard bits of conversation. Honeymoon plans, the Sterling family's business expansion, Paris, luxury spoken of as if it were proof of character. Then I heard one sentence that made me stop. My parents-in-law didn't come today, Tiffany said lightly, as if it were an unimportant detail. They're in Europe. It's probably for the best. Not everyone fits into events like this. A few people laughed. No one asked anything more. I didn't step forward. I didn't need to. Some words once spoken under lights like these always find their way back to the speaker. Sooner or later, my phone vibrated. A message from William. The event company just called. Payments were declined. They're asking for you. I replied with one line. I'm here. Less than 5 minutes later, a man in a black suit approached me. He lowered his head slightly and said there was a technical issue that needed to be resolved before the ceremony could continue. I nodded. I told him I would handle it. The music stopped. Not abruptly, just enough to create an uncomfortable gap. Conversations faded. Heads turned toward the stage where the host stood frozen, searching for the right words. I walked forward. Not fast, not slow. I could feel Elizabeth behind me. Quiet, steady. I didn't take the microphone right away. I looked out at the audience, at faces waiting for an announcement that would match the elegance they had paid for. I apologize for the interruption, I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There are a few misunderstandings that need to be clarified. I looked toward Tyler. My son stood beside Tiffany, his face pale. He didn't step forward. He didn't step back. For the first time that day, he didn't know where he belonged. I am the one listed on the contract for today's event, I continued. And this morning I realized that certain decisions were made on my behalf. Not only about finances, but about whether my wife and I were allowed to be present. Tiffany turned toward Tyler. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw her lips pressed tight. Mr. Sterling, seated in the front row, frowned. He studied me as if trying to decide whether I was a minor detail or a serious liability. I want to be clear about one thing, I said, looking directly at the Sterling family. My son is free to choose who he marries, but he does not have the right to use my trust to erase us from his own story. Whispers moved through the room. The host stepped back, giving me space. I wasn't looking for agreement. I was putting things back where they belonged. I have also learned, I continued, that a significant portion of the resources funding this ceremony came from assets that do not belong to the Sterling family, and that those assets were used for purposes other than what I was told. Mr. Sterling stood up abruptly. He said something, but I raised my hand, not to silence him, just to ask for a few more seconds. He sat back down. His expression had hardened. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, I said, but I will not remain silent when that silence is being used as a tool. I paused, long enough for the words to settle. Then I spoke my final sentence. Slowly, today's ceremony will not continue as planned. Not because of money, but because of a lack of honesty. No one applauded. No one protested right away. Only a thick, heavy silence filled the room. I turned and walked back to Elizabeth. She took my hand. This time, her hand was warmer. Behind us, I could hear arguments beginning to rise. I didn't turn around. I had said what I needed to say. The rest, what they would say to each other while the lights were still on, no longer belonged to me. But I knew one thing. From that moment on, every layer had been peeled away, and no one could pretend anymore that this morning had been just a small incident, something easy to overlook. The silence after my words didn't last long. It cracked apart in small pieces, like thin ice that couldn't hold the weight of so many eyes. I heard whispers rising, then turning into questions. No one bothered to keep quiet anymore. No one left their seat, but no one sat the same way either. Tiffany reacted first. She turned sharply toward Tyler. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Sharp enough for the people nearby to hear. I didn't need to catch every word to understand. Tyler's face changed fast. Confusion, then panic, then something close to begging. He shook his head again and again, hands open, as if trying to hold on to something already slipping away. The Sterling family reacted differently. They didn't look at Tyler right away. They looked at me. That look had lost its polite shine. It carried calculation, as if they were reassessing whose value they had misjudged in this room. Mr. Sterling stood up again. This time he didn't wait for me. He spoke about misunderstandings, about temporary arrangements, about the shared interests of both families. Smooth words, the kind used by people who fix problems by making them sound smaller than they are. I didn't argue, I didn't counter each point. I just stood there, listened, and let the emptiness inside his words reveal itself. When he finished, I said calmly, "If this were just a misunderstanding, then these documents shouldn't exist." I didn't raise the folder. I simply placed it on the table near the stage. William had sent the confirmations minutes earlier. Notice of repossession for the luxury apartment Tyler was living in. Termination of usage rights for the car he drove. Assets registered under my company's name, not his. Everything was clear, dry, without emotion. Tyler stared at the papers as if they were something foreign. He took one step forward, then stopped. Finally, he turned to me. For the first time that day, he looked me directly in the eyes. "Dad," he said, "just one word, nothing after." I didn't answer right away. I waited for the room to quiet a little more, not for effect, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't speaking from a passing surge of emotion. "I gave you a great deal," I said. "Not just money, decision-making power, trust, but there is one thing I never gave you, the right to erase your parents from your life when it becomes convenient." Tiffany let out a short, bitter laugh. She turned to Tyler and said something this time I heard more clearly, about what she had sacrificed, about image, about how, if things were only like this, there was nothing left to discuss. Her voice had lost control. It exposed the frustration of someone realizing the ground beneath her wasn't as solid as she believed. Mrs. Sterling grabbed her daughter's arm. Mr. Sterling looked around as if searching for a dignified exit, but the room no longer offered one. The surrounding eyes had shifted. The admiration was gone. Only cool curiosity remained. Tiffany faced forward again. "If what was promised is no longer there," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "then this ceremony has no meaning at all." No one stopped her. No one tried to persuade her. Tyler stood frozen, stranded between two sides. I looked at my son, and in that moment I didn't see a bad man. I saw someone who had grown used to avoiding responsibility, until everything arrived at once. "Do you want to say anything?" I asked him. Tyler opened his mouth, then closed it again. In the end, he shook his head, not because he had nothing to say, but because every word had come too late. The Sterling family left first. No noise, no goodbyes. Tiffany followed behind them without looking back. Her wedding dress trailed along the floor, but no one was watching it anymore. The crowd parted naturally, like water moving aside. Tyler stayed. When the murmurs in the room shifted again, no longer anger but conclusion, he walked toward me. His voice was lower, more urgent. "I was wrong," he said. "I'll fix it. Just give me time." I looked at him. I didn't feel anger. I felt tired. tired from realizing that some mistakes aren't fixed with time, but with acceptance of consequences. "I'm not taking your future away," I said. "I'm only taking back what belongs to me." I turned to Elizabeth. She stood up. We didn't need to discuss anything. The decisions had already been made, in those quiet calls earlier that morning. As we left, the estate voices still echoed behind us, but they no longer had anything to do with us. There was no sense of victory, no clear relief, only the quiet ending of a role I had held for far too long. The role of the man who stayed behind the scenes to keep everything from collapsing. On the way out, Elizabeth held my hand tighter. I knew she was sad. So was I. But within that sadness, something new was forming, a space no longer filled by other people's expectations. And I understood then, what had collapsed that day was not a wedding. It was the collapse of an illusion, one all of us had kept alive for far too long. We left the estate as the afternoon light began to tilt downward. No one followed us. No one called our names. The road to the gate felt longer than I remembered. Or maybe it was because this time I wasn't in a hurry to prove anything to anyone. Elizabeth leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. I drove slowly, evenly, as if keeping that pace would make what had happened impossible to reverse. A few days later, we didn't return to the old house right away. I booked a small room overlooking the bay. Elizabeth needed sea air, and I needed quiet. Every morning I made tea and sat watching boats move in and out of Seattle's harbor. This city had given me a career, but it also reminded me that anything of value must eventually be put back in its proper place. I called William again, this time not to manage a crisis. I told him I wanted to sell the beachfront villa. He was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "Are you sure?" I told him I was. That house had been held for Tyler. But I understood now. A gift given with hesitation never becomes a blessing. We decided to use the money to create a small scholarship fund in Elizabeth's name, not because she needed a title, but because she deserved to be remembered through something that opened doors for others. Elizabeth didn't say much when I suggested it. She just nodded and said, "If someone gets to move forward because of this, then that's enough." In the weeks that followed, my phone filled with missed calls. Tyler called. I didn't answer, not out of anger, but because I knew that if I picked up too soon, I would become his support again, instead of letting him stand on his own. One evening, while light rain fell, I received a short message. "I understand now. I'm sorry." I read it. I didn't reply. Some apologies need time to find their proper shape. Elizabeth grew stronger. She walked every morning, slow but steady. One day she held my hand and said, "I feel lighter." I knew she wasn't talking only about her health. Neither was I. I no longer had to calculate how my decisions might affect someone's image, or someone's party, or someone else's version of our family story. One afternoon, as we stood on the pier, my phone vibrated again. This time, I glanced at the number and turned it off. No struggle, no regret. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket. Elizabeth looked at me. She didn't ask anything. She just smiled, very softly. I thought about Tyler. I thought about all the years I tried to do everything right for my son. The right schools, the right career, the right image. I realized I had taught him how to succeed, but I hadn't been firm enough in teaching him gratitude. That part was my responsibility. But I also understood something else. Responsibility does not mean continuing to sacrifice yourself for choices someone else knowingly makes. Love is not endless protection. Sometimes, love is stepping aside. The scholarship fund was finalized in early fall. We attended a small announcement gathering. No display, no spotlight. Elizabeth stood beside me, her hand slightly unsteady but her eyes bright. When a young girl stepped forward to receive the first award, Elizabeth squeezed my hand tighter. I didn't say anything. I just thought, maybe this was the gift we were meant to give all along. That evening we returned to Seattle. The city lights came on. I stood by the window watching people move below. I no longer felt the need to keep pace with them. I had gone far enough, for long enough. Before going to bed, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages. I placed it on the table and turned off the light. Elizabeth was already asleep. Her breathing was calm, even. I lay there in the quiet room, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about what I needed to do for my son tomorrow. I was thinking about what I would do for myself. and for the woman who had walked this long road beside me. Some ties, when cut, don't leave wounds. They leave space. Space wide enough to step into a new chapter. Lighter, truer, and finally, free. If you stayed with me until the very end of this story, thank you for listening with patience and understanding. If this story gave you something to think about, please like, subscribe, and share so more honest family stories can reach those who need them. The message I want to leave you with is simple. Success is not measured by what we give, but by how we teach others to value it. Kindness is not wrong, but kindness needs boundaries. Family is a place to return to, not a place to be used. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.